All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Can. I'm here with Lyngso, and we have another Master Gardener program here for us today. And Judith will be our speaker today, not speakers, excuse me. So if you have any questions during the talk, go ahead and type those questions into the chat. And during our question time, I will select them and ask Judith, and she'll address those questions to you. So without further ado, Judith, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. First, I want to tell you a little bit about Master Gardeners so you know what kind of expertise you are inclined to get today. Master Gardeners is a national program. It's organized by state and by county. So this is the San Mateo, San Francisco Bay Area County Master Gardener. And we are trained under the auspices of the University of California at Davis. So we get our training that way. And other Master Gardeners, I think, get trained similarly. What that means is we have a good science-based program, but it also means that our expertise is pretty much based on where we live. And so when you ask questions, it'll be harder for me to answer anything from outside the San Francisco Bay Area. And so it would be better for you, if you live outside, to find out where your local Master Gardeners are and talk to them, because they'll have the local expertise that will be more helpful to you. I'll give it a try, but I think they'll be really more useful for you. Okay, so seeding demystified. I chose demystified because so many people think, oh my, I can't do that. It's so hard, it's so hard. And the truth of the matter is it's largely patience that you need. It's not expertise, because it just takes time to get from a tiny little seed to a plant. So why would we want to go from seed? Why not just go down to the nursery and get a nice 6-pack that's already grown? There's some reasons that at least resonate with me. I can get a larger selection of varieties. There are unbelievable number of plants. This is a seed catalog. I hope you guys can see it, but if you can't, you can hear me ruffle through the pages of seeds. And so if I want a tall, pink plant, a flowered plant, I can find one in there. You might not find it at the nursery, but I can find it there and grow it for myself. So I get to pick what I want. You can get some unusual varieties, and some varieties just don't do well as for practical for commercial production. You can also save seeds and use the seeds from a plant that you've been very fond of, and it's economical. And right now, I think we're all looking for ways to save a little money. So start with making a plan. What are you going to grow? Vegetables or flowers? As Master Gardener, we mainly focus on vegetables. As a gardener, I have to admit that flowers have my heart, so I spend a lot of time trying to grow flowers. You want to figure out how many, depending on how much space you've got and the size of your family. Overproducing is fine, and there are lots of food pantries that would really appreciate your excess, but sometimes things all come ripe at the same time and you just feel overwhelmed. So better to kind of start small and then see what happens. If you're going to be doing any preserving, you do need a quantity. So go ahead and plan that way. And where are you going to plant things? Are they going to be in pots or in the ground? They will need at least 6 hours of sunshine, unless it's a leaf crop like spinach or lettuce. They don't need the sun, but anything that flowers and produces a fruit, like zucchini or tomato or eggplant, those guys have to have 6 hours of sun minimum. Now, what you plant when is tricky. The San Francisco Bay Area has a unique microclimate. We don't match up very well with anything else that I know of. So you'll have to look for local sources for planting schedules. One of the ones that I think is really good is one that we Master Gardeners here in San Mateo, San Francisco County made and put together. And at the end of my slideshow, you will get the link for this. It's a planting calendar for the and I just put up the one for the southern part of the county, but there's one for each part of our area to tell you month by month what you can plant. And it's really helpful to use that. Seed packets worry a lot about last frost date. And more with climate change, we don't see a frost. So it isn't as useful. This is really useful. So you get your supplies together. You can use a commercial seeding mix, or you can make it yourself with the little formula I have here. In a pinch, you can use potting mix. If I were you and I was starting out, I would buy a little bag of commercial seed mix. It's just easier. It's all nice and fine and even in texture, and you've got enough to learn without having to learn how to make a good seed mix. But if you want to make your own, no problem. The only thing I will say is don't use the soil you dig up out of your garden. It's lovely soil. I'm nothing against your garden soil, but it tends to have a lot of organisms in it that can cause problems for seeds. So the more sterile the seed mix you use, the less problems you'll have. And so start out at trying to use something that has as sterile a soil as you can get. Then you need containers. This picture shows you that you don't have to go down and get another plastic container. You can reuse all kinds of things. On the left is a pot made out of newspaper, a little origami project. And the link for how to do that, the YouTube video for how to do that, is in the notes at the end. So it's kind of fun. You can sit there, if you have kids, just line them up, bunch of newspaper, and make yourself a lot of pots. These hold together surprisingly well. You can see that the one on the left has a plant and hasn't fallen apart. So it's pretty good. The one in the center was made by wrapping a brown paper bag around a form. And the one on the right used to have a chicken in it. It's just the bottom of those plastic containers that the barbecued chickens come from the supermarket, and I just burnt holes in it so it had drainage. So they don't have to have anything wonderful. You need at least a couple inches depth of soil, but other than that, I don't think it's a big problem. People use all kinds of things. Some people save toilet paper rolls and use those, and so don't worry about the containers. That's not going to be a big problem for you. And you need seeds. You can get seeds from nurseries and big box stores, or you can get them from online sources. Now, I'm going to turn my Master Gardener badge over. So I am just your friendly local gardener and tell you I buy my seeds online. And I do that because I've found that sometimes the stores aren't able to take as good care of those seed packets as you need to ensure they don't get moist, or they don't get too much sun, or they don't turn over the stock. So I find the online sources are really good. And I've listed 4 of them at the end that you can try. They're not the only 4 out there. They're just the 4 that I have used and I know are good quality, and certainly lots of variety. So, okay, so now I'm a Master Gardener again. And have you any questions so far?
Okay, there are a couple questions, Judith. So will you have the same type of plant from seed from hybrid plants?
That's a great question. And I have a slide just coming up right after this that will answer your question. So if you can wait a second, I'll explain.
Alrighty, we can move on. That's the only question.
That's the only question. All right. So let me do what I promised. Here we go. This is a little slide of seed biology. Those of us who took biology remember good old Gregor Mendel and how plants get their inheritance. So hybrids are what are known as usually F1 hybrids, and those are done by breeding 2 different kinds of plants together to get what's called hybrid vigor. And what that means is that when you try to use the seeds from a hybrid, you're going to get this pattern that you see on the screen. You could get any one of these 4 inheritances. In fact, you could get more than that because it throws back to the grandparents and the great-grandparents. So planting a seed from a hybrid plant is, I think the polite term is a crapshoot. And you may or you may not get what you wanted. If you plant from what's called an open pollinated or an heirloom, or some people call them landrace plants, those are plants that for a long, long time have been bred generation after generation after generation to be stable and to always produce this same plant. That said, Mother Nature's in there, so every once in a while you get a surprise, but almost always you will get the same thing. So same thing goes for saving seeds from a tree. You know, you get out of a lemon tree you love and you think, oh, I'm gonna make another lemon tree. And you save the seeds and you plant them. Well, I'm not sure what you're gonna get because that's probably grafted onto a rootstock, and the rootstock is a different variety, and it may or may not produce the same sort of lemon. Might produce something great, but it also might be a little disappointing. So if you like to play around, it's a great thing to do. If you really just want to get a plant, you're better off to stick with commercial seeds if it's a hybrid, or open pollinated seeds if you're using one that's from your garden, you know, and you want another generation. So you've got a seed, and what's in there? Well, first of all, it has a protective coating all around the outside to keep it from being damaged by the environment. And then it's got an embryo, a little tiny embryo tucked up in the bottom. And then the rest of the seed is basically food for that embryo so that it has something to live on until it can photosynthesize. And what's tricky is that seeds have certain needs to germinate. If you think about it, if a plant drops a seed and it germinates at the wrong time, it'll die. So seeds have to know one thing: when is it right for me? Do I wait through winter and then germinate in the spring? Do I germinate now? Do I wait 2 winters and germinate? Seeds have a remarkable, I'll call it intelligence. I know we're not supposed to anthropomorphize, but nevertheless, and they actually know what they're doing. And what you're doing is you're trying to mimic Mother Nature and give it the kind of environment that will convince it to go ahead and germinate. Oops, the one I want. Okay, so this is the way seeds develop. You put it down in the ground and out comes this little tab. A nice, all have fancy names, so I'm not going to bother with. But notice that the first thing that comes out is the root. That little knobby thing, and then the root. And that's because it has to start gathering resources from the soil around it. In particular, it has to gather water. So water is going to be critical. Then finally, it begins to lift its head and open up and produce 2 leaves. Those first 2 leaves, called cotyledon here, they don't often look like the real leaves. So you can look at those and say, I planted a tomato. What in heaven's name is this thing? Well, it's just those leaves are just very simple, and they're there to do only one thing, and that's to gather enough energy from the sun that it can produce more leaves, and then leaves after those leaves will be the true leaves of the plant. It's kind of a critical stage because when you go to transplant, you have to wait for those true leaves to appear. Otherwise, that plant isn't really mature enough to withstand a transplant. Sorry about this slide. It's a real challenge to read, but I couldn't find anything better. But mainly the point is there's lots of information on the seed packets, and looking at it is well worthwhile. It's going to tell you under the best conditions, how long will it take for these seeds to germinate? Should you cover the seed with a little soil or not? It's how close together to plant them. There's a lot of really useful information. The one thing that isn't always helpful is that they almost always tell you plant this 6 weeks before your last frost date. And if you have no better information, I go ahead and use that. For our area, March 15th, although that time is moving back because of climate change, is usually cited as our last frost date. So seeds to germinate, they need the right temperature, they need the right moisture, and they need the right light. So you're in charge of all of that. So how are we doing so far? Any questions?
Yep, there are a couple questions here. So the list that you provided for seeds, or is the list you provided for seeds or seedlings? I guess
The
there's
list at the end is of seed houses, not nurseries that provide seedlings. No.
okay. Can you use a food dehydrator for saving seeds? Very low temperature for drying seeds?
It's an interesting idea. I don't think I've ever tried it, and I'm not sure I've ever read anything about whether it works or not. My advice is if you've got a bunch of seeds, dry some just out in the open air and try your dehydrator on the rest, plant them up and see what happens. I'm just not sure about that one.
Okay, that's all the questions.
Okay, well, either I'm doing a great job or you guys are asleep at the switch. So, okay, so step by step, you've got your materials together. Whatever container you're going to use, fill it to the top with your soil and then tamp it down gently. You're not going to wham on it, but you want to get rid of any air pockets, because the air pockets aren't a good thing for the little seedling. Is going to try to reach out into that soil and look around for moisture and things like that, and it's going to hit an air pocket which has no moisture, and then that's a big problem. Water those containers before you plant. Little seeds just love to wash down the edge of a container and get buried. So I always try to water from the bottom so that the little pot soaks up the amount of soil that it needs. And when you lift it up, it should feel nice and heavy, like it's got plenty of water. So it's nice and damp. At the first stage of germination, water is the really critical thing. That little seed is looking for water. It's not looking for food at the start. It's looking for something to drink so that it can swell, because it has to swell and break that seed coat. And then this is a part that I sometimes fall down on. Have a label and put the plant name and when you planted it. I always think, oh, I'll remember that's a zinnia. And then I look at the plant, a while later, and I think, which zinnia is that? I didn't write the name on it. And when did I put that in? So it's really good to avoid that later problem. On the label, put the name of the plant and put the planting date. So you're going to put the seeds on according to the packet direction. If the packet says bury the seed deep, you bury it. If it says sprinkle it on the top, you sprinkle it on the top. It's better to sow very thinly if you can, because you may get a lot of little seedlings germinating. And if you do, you're going to have to pull some of those seedlings out or cut them off, because you really only need 1 or 2 seedlings per pot. And pulling them out and cutting them off is a treacherous process. And believe me, I have lost pots of seeds by not doing it gently enough. So thinly, so it's easier when you have to sacrifice some of the seedlings. Then you kind of want to gently press down on the top of the soil so that the seed makes good contact with the soil. I usually take another pot the same size and just gently mush it down on the top. And then you're going to need to cover it so that the moisture, the humidity stays in there. You want to try to avoid having to go watering. If you cover with plastic, then there's no evaporation and the soil stays damp, evenly damp, and it's not feast or famine for the seed. It's even moisture and the seeds will be really happy with that. You can cover them with all kinds of things. The bags that you get produce in, the lid to those barbecue chicken, that's why I use that one, because it comes with a nice little clear lid, and I pop that on. And that allows me to see how things are going in there. Every once in a while, I open it up, have a look, feel the soil, make sure that everything is the way it should be. And then the hard part, for me at least, is waiting, because I want to see that little seedling come up, and I want to be excited about that I finally got it to germinate. The seed packet will give you how long, but the seed packet tells you how long it took them in perfect conditions. You may or may not have perfect conditions. For instance, one of the aids that I use to get seeds to germinate is a heat map. They're easy. You can buy them from all kinds of places, the local nurseries, the big online stores, and the heat map will keep under the pots, will keep it nice and even temperature, and it helps the plants to germinate more quickly. You don't have to have it, but it's helpful. And when the seed packet people put their information on there, you'll see it says something like 15 days at 75 degrees. They mean 75 degrees even temperature. And we get day-night fluctuations. So the seed packet is just a kind of a guideline for how long it's going to take. Moisture differences, again, one of the reasons to cover your little pot with plastic or a dome or something like that is to keep that moisture difference from happening. And your job is to monitor that. You've got to kind of keep on top of it. It really is almost everyday job to just check on them, just go and look at them and say, is there some nasty mold growing on the top of this? Or is there a seedling appearing? It's up to you to really control that environment. And finally, success. And you'll have the true leaves that we talked about earlier. Now that plant is ready to use some fertilizer. And I fertilize with quarter strength because the little seedling, it's easy to burn with something that's more, something that's stronger. So I try to stick with, personally, this is not a Master Gardener position. Personally, I use organic because you're less likely to burn a plant with the organic stuff. And it's just better, I think, for the environment. But that's not an official position of the University of California. So please don't get me in trouble. And then from there, when the plants are 2 or 3 inches tall and the true leaves are nice and large, and that plant looks really ready, you can move it on to a larger container or even out into the ground if it's vigorous enough. You should plant in the late afternoon, because if you plant in the morning, that little plant is going to have to survive a whole day of sunshine, and it might just not be ready for that. It needs to settle in, figure out where its water source is, get itself ready, because the next day it's going to have to survive on its own. I often put a piece of shingle or a board or something like that on the sunny side of a new plant to shade it a little bit for the first few days, because sometimes they can really get crisp. If you transplant out into the garden and the next day is one of those really warm days we get, that plant is going to have a hard time surviving. So if you give it a little bit of shade at first, and then when you see that it's established, it's started to put out some new leaves, you can pull the protection and let it go from there. Protecting it from pests and watering. The nasty pests that I am troubled by are slugs and snails, because that's very tender foliage, and the slugs and snails think that is just a picnic. And birds, particularly jays, think that looks like, oh, that looks good. I think I'll pull that out and see what it tastes like. So I use chicken wire. I just make a wad of little dome of chicken wire and pop it over that until the plant's really got strong roots and is going away, growing. And that way the jays don't come and spoil my work. Slugs and snails, it's the usual. You have to either go out after dark with your flashlight and pick them and throw them in a bucket of salt water, or you can make a little ring of copper tape around your seedling. You can use slug or snail poison. I don't personally, but that's an individual choice. But they're going to be the big problem for keeping your plant going. Pricking them out. So pricking them out means taking that little seedling out of its initial pot, lifting it gently and putting it either in a bigger pot or out into the garden. This is amateur photography at its best. The first picture here is about the size of the marigold that I had planted. I pulled it out to show you this is what the roots look like at that stage. They're nicely established, and you can see it's got its true leaves. And then I put it in this pot. And if we were in my kitchen, I would show you the bright yellow marigolds that grew from it. So what I use to prick them out is a plastic picnic fork. If you have an old metal fork, you can use that too. It's not the materials, but the fork is like a tiny little pitchfork. It goes down, it doesn't disturb the roots as much. And I lift out my seedling on that, and then I put it into the soil where it goes. So that I think is very helpful when you're trying to do your transplanting. Okay, how about it? Questions?
Yep, there are a few here. So are you going to cover propagation at all in this talk?
Gosh, I thought I was covering propagation. I'm not sure what.
From cuttings, from.
Oh, no, I'm not covering propagation from cuttings.
Okay, got it. Sorry. The second one is, how do you water from the bottom in trays?
Oh, that's good. I should have been clearer about that. I use a plastic tray. You could use a baking pan or anything you want. And I put water in it, and I put all my little pots of soil, and I let it sit I usually let it sit for an hour or so that it has a chance to really pull up into the soil. It does it by capillary action, if you care, and pulls up all the moisture that it needs, so that when you see the top of the soil looks kind of damp, then it's taken up all the water that it needs, and you can pull it out of there if you want. I actually leave mine in that tray because I keep watering the same way. I come in and I just put in half an inch of water to water, and let the plant take what it wants out of that rather than spraying overhead. It's very easy to dislodge seedlings with a spray. Even those gentle sprays, sometimes for a tiny seedling, is too much. So watering from the bottom just means finding a reservoir that will hold half an inch or more of water. Initially, it might be more than half an inch because that soil that you're starting with might have been pretty dry. But usually after that, half an inch of water, and let it pull it up.
All right. Next question is, do you use a thermostat with your heat mat to ensure correct temperature?
Well, that might be the next step. I kind of am incremental on these things. The heat mat I have, it does not have a thermostat on it. And you're right, a thermostat would help, because then I could set the temperature, and different seeds want different temperatures. Thermostats are very nice to have. And maybe the next time I feel like a splurge, I'll get a thermostat for my heat mats. I tend to run 6 or 8 heat mats at the same time, because I'm generating a lot of seedlings for our Master Gardener plant sale. It would be a little expensive to have thermostat for each of them, but it's a really useful thing. And if you can splurge for it, I would do it.
Alrighty. I know as master gardeners, you can't really recommend particular brands of fertilizers, but are you able to share with us any of your favorite fertilizers that you use or have used in the past?
You know, I'm not a brand person. What I look for is a symbol on the fertilizer that says OMRI. And OMRI stands for some organization that verifies that it's organic. And as far as I know, they're on the up and up, and they have analyzed that and made sure that it is an organic fertilizer. And so as long as it has that, I tend to trust it and go by price. You will see fertilizers that have various strengths. And that is something that, you know, to pay attention to in addition. Now, some fertilizers say 10-10-10 or 20-20-20 or 30-30-30. I'd stay with something 10-10-10 or lower, regardless of whether it's organic or inorganic, because seedlings really can't take those stronger fertilizers.
Okay. If you wait too long to transplant and the seedling is leggy, should you plant it deeper when it's transplanted?
Okay, some plants you can do that with. Tomatoes, eggplant, peppers, all can be planted and actually should be planted deeper because they'll make little roots along their stem, and then you have more roots, and the more roots there are, the easier it is for the plant to reach out in the soil around it and take up its nutrients. But most plants, you need to plant them at the same depth. Now, the problem of them being leggy is usually because of light, and that is a tricky business. I finally broke down and bought an overhead LED contraption that provides some extra light, because I listened to an interesting gardening podcast, and they were saying that even if you've got pretty good light, the seedlings will do better with 16 hours of light. Well, we can't always provide 16 hours of light. I certainly can't. And so supplementing it with extra light helps to keep the plant from having that leggy problem. Let's say you can't provide the light, the thing got away from you, it's too big and it's leggy. You know what? Just stick it in the soil and see what happens. You can pinch it out when it gets a little taller, and then it will bush out. If you take the little tiny growing tip and just with your fingernails, the plant will say, oh dear, I've lost my head. I'm going to grow branches, and it'll get squattier that way most of the time.
All righty. This is just a clarification. So when you're transplanting plants, you want to ensure that you're not touching the roots, but just transplanting it by touching the tip of the leaves to move them. Is that right?
Yes, yes. You just touch the leaves. I'm glad you asked that because I wasn't clear about that. The stem is where all of the nutrients and water are going up and down in that plant. If you press down on that, you can close off the little tubes that bring the water and fertilizer up and down, and that's the end of that plant. So when you lift a plant, if I use the little picnic fork and I don't actually touch it, but sometimes you end up having to touch it, and then touch a leaf, because if you mash down on a leaf accidentally, it's got other leaves. You mash down on the stem, it doesn't have other stems. So you got to be a little careful about that and trying to just use the leaves as your means of manipulating the plant.
Okay, last question, and then I think we can move on. Do you use compost or worm castings?
I use compost in my garden. I don't tend to use my compost in seeding mixes because it has the same issues that the soil has. There's lots of microorganisms in compost if you're lucky, and they're mostly good, beneficial. But seedlings have a special requirement for not having to fend off too many of the biological critters that are living in the soil, and you really don't want them to have to deal with that. So your compost, if you're making your own compost, or even if you bought compost, unless it's been sterilized, has got a lot of active stuff in there. And that's actually what you want, because once the plant's out and got itself established, it's using that network of fungus to gather its nutrients. But at first, compost might be just a little too active for it. And I've never used worm castings. I know people who do. I just haven't gotten around to trying it.
Okay, I think that's it for questions for this round.
Okay, doke, good enough. So the other way of starting seeds is by what's called direct sowing. Some seeds really need to go directly in the ground. They resent being transplanted. And if you try to grow them in a pot and transplant them, which I've done before I got smart about the whole thing, it stunts their growth. Zucchini plants, interesting example. Zucchini plants, you put them in, and of course, that's a big seed. It grows pretty quickly. And when the roots hit the side of the pot, that plant thinks that it's done growing, and it starts trying to make fruit. And it's only got about 5 or 6 leaves, and it's predictable that it's not going to be a very healthy plant. So some things just don't like to get put in a pot. How to sow, here's what I do, which I think is pretty simple and easy. I mark out where I want to put my seedlings. I scoop out some soil. I put in some seedling mix right in that same place. So I've essentially made a tiny pot in the soil with something that's a little more sterile and a little finer grain than the soil itself. Most of the things that you direct sow are pretty tough plants, and they don't mind being in regular soil. But to give them an added advantage, I give them this little nest of their own to start out. And again, you would water carefully, make sure that that soil is nice and damp. And I like to use some sort of it's called a cloche or a hot cap to keep the moisture around. And you can see from the photos, these folks have cut off the bottom of milk jugs and put them over where they planted their seeds to provide a little protection from wind, from critters who want to dig up those seeds, and keep the plants a little bit sheltered until they're ready. You're going to have to monitor the watering very, very carefully until you get true leaves out, because it's easy for you to either overwater, in which case the soil gets soggy and mold sets in, and a nasty disease called damping off, which can actually happen in pots as well. And so water carefully. Once the true leaves are up, you can pull those hot caps off and you can water fairly normally. You might not give them a real hard spray until they're a little stronger, but once the true leaves are up, it means that the roots are established enough that they've been able to provide the moisture and the nutrients for that plant to create leaves. So it usually means that plant's mature enough that you can go ahead and put the water on like you would just regularly. You have to worry again about pests and the weather. So we're back to either chicken wire or whatever, and slugs and snails, who are just delighted to make a picnic off your hard-won seedlings. But planting direct is good because it's less work for you. You just put the seed in, and when it germinates, you're done. There's no transplanting. The more fragile plants, you pretty much are going to be better off doing from the little pots. The other reason I sometimes would grow in pots as opposed to directly in the soil is that I could get a jump start on the season. So some plants really need warm soil, and they're not going to thrive until the soil gets really nice and warm. I can control the soil temperature in a little pot. I can't control the soil temperature in a raised bed or in the, just regular ground. Raised beds warm up first, but there still takes a while for them to get warm enough to really give a good environment. So if I, for instance, wanted to have a plant to put out as soon as the soil was warm enough, I'd start it in the little pots and get it all ready so that as soon as the soil is nice and warm, I could put it out there. And then I could start another batch in pots. And as soon as I've harvested the plant that's out there, I'm ready to plop a new one in. And that succession planting keeps your garden going longer. So these are the books that I recommend. In particular, you might want to look at Pam Pierce's book, Golden Gate Gardening. These other books are really aimed at propagation. But this is a good general book. We used to have Sunset Magazine and the Sunset Garden Guide, which was helpful because it was aimed at the West Coast and it had a lot of information that was unique to us. But that's gone now, or harder to get at any rate from Sunset. So Pam Pierce's book not only is about West Coast, it's really right about our garden area. And I use that a fair amount. There's a lot in there, more than propagating all kinds of other things. She focuses mostly on vegetables, but her stuff is very sound, and it's a worthwhile addition. And you can get a used copy for not that much. So here are some of my favorite URLs. And Cam, you're going to be sending out the slide set so people will have these URLs, right?
Correct.
Okay. So bunches of URLs here of various kinds, but I'm going to go past this slide to this slide because this is where the seed companies that I have used, not endorsed by the University of California, just ones I have used and been successful with. Grow Organic is a company up in Grass Valley, so they're more local to us. Johnny Seed is, I think it's in the East Coast, but I've had good luck with their seeds. Territorial Seed is in Oregon. And Rare Seed is really Baker's Heirloom Seed. That's their website. What's helpful about these guys is not just that they have pretty reliable seeds, but they really care about you being successful. And they put out on their website just wonderful videos and how-tos and calendars, and they've really made a big effort. So I know that they're serious about your success, and that's, I think, the mark of a good company, when they care, not that you just buy their seeds and go away, but that you buy their seeds and you have success and you feel good about the whole thing. So I really would encourage you, even if you don't buy seeds from them, just go ahead and look at these URLs and check through some of their videos and see what you think, because they're really helpful, and especially when you're starting out. And then if you get the bug and you really want to know everything there is to know about seed propagation, this URL for this place, it's a UK site. These people have got everything I have ever thought about in the way of seed propagation. And you can just kind of troll through there and see all kinds of techniques and ideas and all kinds of things. And surprising amount of the information is relevant to us, even though it's a UK site. And so it's worth kind of having a poke around in there. So I didn't stop to put a slide at this point, but I should have put a slide for questions. Are there any questions?
Okay, so there are a few questions about hot caps. So are hot caps are milk bottles without caps on? Is that right?
Oh, okay.
What
Hot caps are actually a commercial product. They're a tiny little dome that you pop on. But if you take a milk bottle, a soda pop bottle, cut the bottom off, pull the cap off, pop it over there, guess what? You got a hot cap. And that will do just the same job that the commercial hot caps would have done. Stabilizing them is a little tricky. what I do is I burn 3 holes right at the base of them where they're going to go on the soil. And then I take the things you use to hold down your drip irrigation and put it through those holes to secure those, because when the wind comes or when the squirrels run by, they go and they fall over. And so I find that that is a way of keeping them from crashing over. It makes it a little harder for you to check on them, but I think it's worth it, because they've, at least in my garden, the squirrels will just knock everything over. You can buy commercial hot caps. They already have the little holes in them. You can buy domes, big domes that fit over several little pots. There are tons and tons of things that are out there to help you. I wanted to focus on things you can reuse, because we're all drowning in plastic. And it's nice to know that something that you bought because you needed some quick meal can have another life and serve a purpose. So I tried to focus on stuff that you could get by just reusing things, but there are lots of commercial products to help you.
So would putting milk cartons be a problem in hot environment like Florida and other places? And if so, like what temperature would be ideal to use the hot caps?
Okay. Again, my training is for the San Francisco Bay Area, so I can't speak for what happens in Florida. My experience is they don't heat up that much because you've screwed the top off. I can believe that if we had some of those 105-day temperatures, they might get pretty much hot. What I do when we have those unusually hot days in our area, I use a product sometimes called a frost cloth. I think the commercial brand is Agribon, but there are others. You can buy it at the nursery. It's a very lightweight, not woven fabric that lets air and light and water through. And if I'm worried about, we're having a terrible, heat spell, unusually hot for us, I drape that over. I drape it over plants. I drape it over seedlings. I drape it over everything that I think can be damaged, because it has a little property of reflecting. Because it's white, it reflects the light, and it helps a little bit with the heat buildup. That said, if you're worried, you're going to have to go out there and take those caps off for the heat spell. But then those little plants are going to have to defend with the heat. And because our heat doesn't tend to come with humidity, they can burn to be crispy critters pretty quick. If you're in Florida, I think you get humidity and it'd be different. But for us, we don't get much humidity with our heat. And so I haven't had anything burn up under a hot cap, but that's the experience of one person.
Okay. What exactly do you use to burn the holes in plastic containers?
When my husband isn't looking, I use a soldering iron. Sometimes I use a nail that I hold with a pair of pliers and put over the flames of my gas stove and heat it up. I have tried to use a drill. The drill seems only to work on the sturdier plastics. Otherwise, it just kind of bounces around. Trying to think what else you could use. Heat is your friend. So anything you can find that'll put out a little heat will poke a hole.
Okay. Can you buy seeds from the UK and bring them into California?
Interesting question. You used to be able to. And I did. But I have been getting notices from the same seed houses that I've used for years that because of Brexit, they are no longer exporting seeds. I don't know about other countries in Europe, because the seed houses I used were all UK seed houses, but both of the ones I've used in the UK have sent me notices saying, sorry, we can't ship to the US anymore. That could change. I mean, it could probably change any moment, but there are requirements that the US puts on anything of plant material that's brought into the US. that they have to meet those requirements. And I guess on top of all the other tumult that Brexit brought up for them, they just couldn't handle it. So yes, theoretically you can, and I have brought home seeds in my suitcase and planted them. I don't think you were supposed to do that, but I did. But right now I have not been able to get, and my favorite seed house for flowers in Great Britain is not exporting to the US. So too bad.
Could you talk about the Master Gardener plant sale and when and where usually it happens or it
Yeah.
is held?
Oh, I'd love to talk about that. That's how we raise the money so that we can keep going. Our plant sale is in April. Usually the second Saturday in April, but that's dependent on the place we hold the sale, because they get to say if that Saturday is booked, we don't get to use it because we don't pay them very much. We sell tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, pollinator plants, like plants that bring pollinators to your garden, sometimes succulents. We have demonstrations that go on. We have lots of organizations represented that are kind of allies, like master composters and people like that. It's a really super deal. If you see on the last slide, actually on any of the question slides, the email for Master Gardeners, just send them a little note saying, hey, could you put me on the mailing list so I know when your plant sale is? And then you'll get a notice that'll tell you that when the plant sale is coming up. And I will say this last year, I don't know what happened, but when we opened the doors, it was like, whoo, and things sold out. So my advice is come early if you really care about what variety you get. And come to my table, because all the eggplant and peppers are the ones that I get to grow, and I really enjoy doing that. But tomatoes, we have lots and lots of tomatoes, so that's always fun.
Okay, I think that's pretty much it. I don't see any other questions here. Karen, I see that there are some questions being ignored. I'm not getting any direct messages, so if you aren't either, I think that's about it. But Judith, if people have questions, how do they get a hold of you? Do they contact the Master Gardener hotline to reach you, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Undoubtedly, when you get started, as soon as you go to do this, all of what I made sound very simple and straightforward is going to pose all kinds of questions. So yes, the Master Gardener hotline, either phone and leave a voicemail, but better really is to email and send photos of what's going on. And other Master Gardeners know how to propagate seeds besides myself. I just happen to teach the class. And you'll get an answer about helping you to figure out what's going on. So those slides that said questions on them, and the final slides, here we go. This final slide here tells you all about how to reach us. So, and I did want to acknowledge the Lyngso garden materials and thank them for giving us this opportunity to talk to you and try to help you get started with the seeds. I hope you'll give it a try. I think you'll find that it's really a fun activity, great to do with kids. Use big seeds, that's my advice, or radishes, because they come up. How I got hooked on gardening was really my grandfather had to take care of me a lot because my grandmother couldn't cope with my excess energy. And he gardened. So his attitude was, if you're around me, you're going to garden. And so he gave me a tiny little plot and a bunch of radish seeds, and I was hooked. So seeds are a gateway drug.
Could you go back to that Master Gardener hotline slide one. There we go. Okay, fantastic. And these are just local resources, obviously, and
These, when we get past the COVID period, will be where we'll be. Unfortunately, we still have, we've got some issues about coming in person. So we have to use email and phone calls until we're ready to go.
alrighty, well, I think we're all out of questions here. So thank you so much, Judith, for your excellent presentation. And this will be available on our community resources tomorrow. So look forward to rewatching it. If you have more questions, just feel free to contact the Master Gardener hotline here or email. And thanks to everybody for attending. Any closing remarks, Judith?
No, just give it a go. And remember, if you think about it, a plant makes thousands and thousands of seeds in the expectation that there's going to be some that aren't going to germinate. So if you are only planting 8 or 10 seeds and you have some failures, maybe they all fail on you, it's just part of your learning process and you will get it in the end.
Fantastic. Well, thank you once again. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.
Bye-bye.